Hello, this is Unsigned with GameLeap, and today we're going to be giving you guys the patch 13.22 top lane tier list. Top has received a ton of changes this patch, with the general meta actually shifting to a more scaling focus. Some new interesting picks are starting to crop up, so make sure to stay tuned to get a head start on everyone else. As always, this tier list is going to be primarily focused for climbing under Diamond. If you're Diamond or above, something like Cassante is obviously incredibly overpowered, but to the general population that hasn't invested the time into him or doesn't quite have the mechanical prowess, he is a less attractive champion. That being said, let's get right into this tier list, starting with the OP tier. Our number one pick for OP tier hasn't changed from last patch. It's still going to be Camille. This champion scales really hard, has incredibly good matchups, the grass page is really unskilled to play, and she gets to abuse Divine Sunder in the slower game. She does have some bad matchups consisting of Jax, Tahm Kench, Singed, and sometimes Mordekaiser, but even these matchups can be easily beaten as long as we hit our Sunder without feeding. If you're new to Camille, I would recommend going the Teleport plus Ignite setup and waiting for your jungler to gank and simply using your Ignite whenever it happens. Remember that when we're playing Camille, going even or slightly behind is actually winning on this champion because of how strong her scaling is. If we make it to level 9 without giving up a kill or two, then we're going to have an easy game. Without the Grasp of the Undying setup, I would say that Camille is much closer to A tier. However, Grasp is one of the only unnerfed offensive keystones. It has a great scaling and it allows Kayle to trade evenly in lane with some sustain. Fiora is going to be our next OP tier champion. While Fiora is a little bit more difficult than most other top laners, she is incredibly rewarding once we put the bare minimum of effort into her. Much like Camille, we can run the Grasp setup for an easier lane phase. That being said, to conquer Fiora is still incredibly strong. It just requires more effort to get there. If you're learning the champion, I would recommend Resolve Tree Primary, and if you've put a little bit of time in the champion, I would recommend swapping over to Precision once we understand our matchups. Of course, against squishy champions, always run Grasp, and against some tanky matchups that are going to trade aggressively, run it as well, but for the most part, Conquer is going to be the key to beating these tanks. The only three super bad matchups to watch out for in the champion are going to be Vayne, Malphite, and Poppy in that order. Some champions like Kayle have a decent win rate into Fiora, but we can beat her by simply going Ignite and all-in her level 1 3. Remember that if we ever get a lead on Fiora, we want to freeze the lane on our side, poke using our vitals, keep our opponent's zone using our Q poke, and then wait for our jungler to come up to secure a kill. We can also look for an all-in whenever our ultimate is up. Divine Sunder into Ravenous Hydra is the way to go on this champion. Just make sure that we're building resistance to it pretty early on, usually after our mythic item. Just a quick reminder, if you want to learn any of the champions presented to you in this list, head on over to GameLeap.com. I've been working on the website for over 3 years, crafting some of the best tips and tricks videos for you to get the most out of your champion in the lowest amount of time. I'll see you on the website. Now, before we continue on this tier list, let's go ahead and talk about Cassante and his exact place in the tiering. As you all know, Cassante is very strong right now. He boasts a 51% win rate with a 30% ban rate. However, that being said, there is a whole bucket of nerfs ready to be thrown at him on patch 13.23, and this champion does have a higher barrier to entry than most. If you're able to accept that this champion is going to be nerfed and you don't mind learning him through this higher barrier to entry and losing a couple of games, then I do highly recommend picking him up. Just know that right now Cassante has about a 51% win rate, whereas Singed has a 53.2% win rate. A Cassante combo consists of landing a Q3, immediately full charging your W, getting an auto attack, landing another Q, using your E for the auto reset, ulting immediately, using your Q again, using another auto attack, short charging your W, getting an auto, and then using your Q again. Reminder that you have about 2.5 seconds to do this before people start getting away from you. At the highest level, Cassante is without a doubt one of the highest OP tier champions, but for the average player, I fear that this champion is pretty hard to pick up. He's very micro intensive, and the reward for playing him might be a little bit less than other champions that are significantly easier. If you have mechanics, Cassante is one of the highest rated OP tier champions. If you don't have mechanics, I would say that he sits closer to the bottom of S tier currently. Now that we've gotten our harder to play OP tier champions out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the easier to play ones. Garen is going to be our next pick for OP tier. The phase rush nerfs did actually hurt this champion quite a bit, but he is still miles ahead of basically every other juggernaut currently. If you guys haven't been keeping up with professional play, Garen has even been picked in the World Championship tournament. This champion is no joke at the moment. Phase rush with Stridebreaker is going to be our preferred setup, and we always want to rush Berserker's Greaves on this champion. While being an OP tier, Garen does have some terrible matchups. Kayle, Camille, Vayne, and Fiora, just to name a few. When we're playing Garen, we want to focus on taking very short trades until we hit level 6 and we can go for an all-in. Using an auto attack into QE proccing our phase rush and then using our W to run away is of the utmost importance on this champ until we have our kill pressure at 6. Once we master this hit and run playstyle using Garen's easy hit, then it becomes significantly easier for us to pilot this champion. If you're playing Garen, go ahead and ban Camille, try to dodge Kayle and Vayne if you can. Top lane is all about counter picks. We want to try and delay our pick as long as possible in champ select. If we can get a counter pick off on our opponent, then it's going to be the difference between us dominating them and getting dominated. Next up in OP tier is going to be Malphite, once again primarily as a counter pick. Interestingly enough, Malphite only has terrible matchups into other tanks. Things like Rumble are a little bit more difficult, but when you play Malphite into Sion and Sion simply ignores you and takes all your turrets, the game is unplayable. On Malphite, you want to go Grasp into the melee champions and try to farm that up as much as possible, and into ranged champions we want to go Arcane Comet and usually into a slight AP lean. If we're playing against something like Vayne or Kayle, then we can go Night Harvester first item and try to 100-0 them on our item's cooldown. Our final pick for OP tier this patch is going to be Illaoi. Illaoi has really bad matchups into Vayne, Poppy, Teemo, and Kayle, but as long as we're able to avoid these matchups and actually draft her into another melee, we are going to have a great time on this patch. While turret platings have been nerfed, Illaoi is still incredibly dominant in lane and doesn't really have a bad matchup into a single melee champion. We can easily fight a 1v2 and draw a huge amount of pressure to ourselves in a side lane no matter what, even if we're 0 and 10. For this champion, we always want to go some sort of Sheen item and a Resolve Primary Grasp with the Undying setup. This will allow us to farm our procs quite easily off of our E and then have access to Demolish, which turns us into a disgustingly strong split pusher. Sheen item consisting of either Divine Center or Iceborne Gauntlet based on our matchup, Iceborne into squishy champions that we can run down, Divine Center into the tankier matchups that we want to extend fight. Then we go Resistance Boots into an immediate Black Cleaver, followed by a Hole Breaker. After a Hole Breaker, we want to complete Steric's Gauge and then focus on trying to go for split pushing Demolish procs in a side lane. If the enemy team comes to 1v2 us, we simply kill both of our opponents and then go and take all the turrets as well. This champion is really strong in a side lane, but we have to opt into the split push playstyle. Now that we've covered all of our OP tier champions, let's talk about the S tier and some of the more sleeper picks that are starting to show up. As you all know, in patch 13.21, Tahm Kench was a menace, and in patch 13.22, a nerf to him did ship. This did affect his win rate quite heavily, bringing him down by about 2%. The win rate difference here prevents Tahm Kench from being a super strong blind pick, but as a counter pick, this champion is ridiculously oppressive. Pick Tahm into other tanks, champions like Renekton, and also champions like Camille. Just make sure that when we're playing Kench, we try to avoid champions with a better sustained all-in. Champions like Volibear can actually straight up manfight Tahm Kench, and it will prevent you from going in on them. Next in S tier, which is quite surprising, is Nasus. This champion is really strong this patch because of how good he is as a counter pick. For Nasus, we want to try to avoid Garen, Camille, and Tahm Kench, but we essentially win every other matchup. Divine Center if we want to be heavily fighting in our lane, otherwise we go Trinity Force and try to split push turrets down. When we play Nasus, it is most important for us to focus on getting that Sheen item. The second that we finish our Sheen, then we can focus on stacking ability haste through things like Ionian Boots of Lucidity, Kindle Gems, and the like. As Nasus, you actually generate the majority of your stacks before 20 minutes, so that is going to be your farm period of the game. Then we want to focus on skirmishing and trying to go for objectives. QW Emax is the way to go on this champion, and make sure that you pick him into heavy auto attackers or things like Cassante that you can simply just ignore. Speaking of auto attackers, let's go ahead and cover two of them. Jax is without a doubt one of the strongest carry tops in the game right now. However, Jax has abysmal matchups into a lot of the top lane roster at the moment, which is going to single-handedly keep him from being an OP tier. Garen, Nasus, Malphite, Pantheon, Illaoi, and Singed all make this champion completely unplayable if picked by somebody with a mostly working brain. For these reasons, I would not recommend Jax as an OP tier champion because he cannot be blind picked in a reasonable manner. Champions in OP tier usually have 1 to 3 bad matchups, and they're going to be okay if you know how to navigate them correctly. However, if we play Jax into the majority of these matchups, it's just going to be an automatic loss for our lane phase. As you know, winning your lane is of the utmost importance of League of Legends because we cannot access our strong skirmishing and our scaling portion of the game if we've been shut down adequately during the lane phase. And this is exactly Jax's fatal flaw. If this champ does not get off the ground, then he lacks damage, he's incredibly squishy, and easy to burn down. That being said, if we don't have one of these few nightmare matchups, then Jax is a very oppressive champion to play against. Divine Center and Trinity Force are equally as strong on this champion, with a lean towards Divine Center. Once we complete our mythic item, then we usually want to go Ionian Boots of Lucidity for the huge amounts of ability haste that it grants us, into some other ability haste item like Spear of Shojin or Frozen Heart. These will help round out Jax's stats and give him a little bit more effective HP for his massive armor and magic resist values that he gets from his R. Just know that if you have a bad matchup on this champion, you are going to have a terrible time. That being said, he's one of the stronger carries available right now. Now, next up for S tier is going to be Yone, but only if we understand how to adapt to his playstyles. If we play a matchup like Jax, Renekton, or the like on Yone, it's usually unplayable unless we run Exhaust. If you play Yone with Exhaust, there is not a single champion in the game that will beat you in an all-in. Lethal Tempo makes you have an incredibly strong level 1. If we're able to space our opponent and not actually walk up and auto attack them, only hitting our Qs, then there's basically no counterplay for this. If our opponent all-ins us, we drop our Exhaust on them, and then we get to kill them before they're able to do anything. When we play Yone, we want to use our E to space people out and use our W to try and mitigate as much damage as possible over the course of a fight, and also use the increased range on our Q. If we're able to combine all three of these things in our kit, then Yone basically does not have a single bad matchup. However, a lot of Yone players aren't able to access all these parts of his kit effectively. This is where the Exhaust comes in to help you manage your matchups. Once we have a better understanding of the champion, then we can swap back to Teleport unless we're against Jax, Renekton, or Riven, in which case we do want to run Exhaust. Kraken Slayer into Hull Breaker is the way to go on this champion, and once you hit these 2 items, there is essentially no counterplay to him. He is way too strong as a split pusher in the side lane, he will out-sustain you due to the massive shielding that he gets from his W, and he will out-all-in you thanks to lethal tempo, his strong ultimate, and his Q. Easily a champion that teeters on the very bottom of OP tier if we're able to access his kit appropriately, but significantly weaker if we're not able to access this without the exhaust setup. If we run exhaust on Yone even as a not super talented player, then he's easily an S tier. Now I want to talk about one final S tier champion that is teetering on the very edge of OP tier, and that is going to be Singed. This champion is hilariously strong after the Conqueror bug fix. It is disgusting how much he's able to get away with currently. If you have never played Singed, then I highly recommend that you pick up this champion, as he is one of the most fun top laners to play in the entire game. If we have a bad matchup, we can simply dip out and go and proxy our opponent, and then gank mid on repeat, making them rage quit. If we have a good matchup, however, then we turn into a really annoying bully that's able to simply take trades and then run around in a circle around our opponent, so they're not able to trade back against us. The best build for this champion is going to be Rylai's, immediately followed by Irradiant Virtue with first item Swifty Boots. If we play Singed, it's a good idea to ban Kayle, and then try to dodge the Tryndamere matchup as much as possible. While Tryndamere is an auto attacker, the range increase has made him a very strong candidate for one of Singed's worst matchups. Trynd also has a frequent dash as well as decent sustain during the lane phase. He's able to go Hull Breaker, which is a nightmare for Singed. These 2 matchups aside, this champion is completely unfair right now and a great counterpick into the majority of the meta champs. We simply want to run Flash plus Ignite, go Nimbus Cloak on the champion with Conqueror setup, and just be an absolute menace while we can. Spellbook is also a decent option for this champion if we don't understand how to play the Conqueror setup, or we need a little bit of power in a ranged matchup. That being said, Conqueror is so dumbly strong at the moment, there is not a single other rune that you'll need. Go ahead and run this in every single game. I promise you, if Singed were to have a higher play rate, this champion would get nerfed instantly in one patch. On patch 13.22, his win rate is sky high, his playstyle is super fun, and his pick rate is really low. If you want a sleeper pick, there is no better option on this entire list. Anyways, this is Unsung with GameLeap. Thank you all for watching, and I hope that you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys in the next video.